Welcome to this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. I'm Susan Littlefield. As you can see over my shoulder, we've got some FFAers behind us as we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, as the Nebraska State FFA Convention is going to be wrapping up later this evening. Well, an interesting market trade that we saw that we will continue to deal with. Today, we're going to talk more about what's happening in the grain prices, but the livestock prices this week. We're going to look at a breakdown, too, of what's happening on the basis. Improvement there, but what does a stronger basis mean for those cattle producers? We'll also talk more about the war in Ukraine and a lot more affecting this week's trade.
It may be small, but this little bean fuels a lot of power. It powers a food industry as a top source of protein. It's a fuel that powers diesel engines with fewer emissions. It powers a state economy and bottom lines, and it powers the rest of the world as a top Nebraska export. Yeah, it may be small, but we're finding more ways for this little bean to power Nebraska.
Well, welcome back as we continue now here at the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup. We're being joined by John Pfanner and Ethan Bruland, both of the gentlemen with Tredas. And John, we're going to kind of kick it off with you. Let's take a look at what we're seeing on these numbers as you break down the corn and the beans for this week.
So this week we had really strong finish on grains. Corn made new contract highs on July, Sep, and December, and on out forward, but I'll hit on those. Today finished up July corn up 9 at 7.59. September was up 8 at 7.27. And December was up 6 at 7.15. And again, all new contract highs there. Soybeans, after the report there on the 31st, where they took about $1.20 hit, we've recovered $1 on old crop. So July was up 41 cents today at 16.68. And again, that's roughly $1 recovery there from where we bottomed out post report. November was up 28 today at 14.95. That's about 20 cents off of the contract high there. And then on Chicago wheat, we're seeing a lot of interesting movement there, when the war in the Ukraine started, and right there around March 3rd, the July Sep inverse peaked about $1.87. And today we're back to just a 1 penny, 1 cent inverse. And what you saw there with that inverse happened, you saw basis drop, anywhere from $2 under to $3 under, depending on where you were. And so that now you're seeing that basis improve. And we've actually recovered basis, at least in my area here in North Alabama, about $2.50. And I think you're starting to see the recovery, maybe not quite that aggressive in some areas, but it is getting better. So that's pretty significant. And, with the report, we had a WASDE report today that was fairly neutral. But from here on out, it'll be back to trade, at least for the next month. We'll be trading war premium, planting pace, weather, it'll be kind of the standard fare.
You did talk about that WASDE report from Friday. Not a lot of excitement in that report. And then I had one guy say, "What? We had a report from the USDA?" I think that tells you how uneventful those numbers were.
Yep, they were. Well, Ethan, do you have the stocks in front of you? I mean, the corn stocks down? World stocks were up slightly, I think, and then wheat was down a little bit.
Yep. So today's report overall was negative. Your corn and soybeans, and it was slightly positive on the wheat side. Again, like you mentioned, Susan, the interesting thing from last week's report is it was kind of a quiet event, but I think you have a lot of guys starting to really ask the question, is the U.S. farmer going to plant more soybeans than corn? Personally, I have a really hard time thinking that's going to happen. I know obviously your inputs are higher fertilizer, but we love corn here, and it's going to be interesting to see if those numbers converge a little bit from now until June.
Especially with where corn prices are, that ought to start encouraging the corn acres to maybe come back into production if there's availability of seed and fertilizer. I think there's only been 3 times in history, maybe, since they've been keeping the records of the planting, that we've actually planted more soybeans than corn. So it would be a pretty unique situation if we did.
Ethan, I want to look at the quick rundown of the livestock side, what you saw in this week's trade.
So your actual futures trade in general was a little bit weaker on the live side. And that, if you look at it from a seasonality standpoint, that's not uncommon. Typically we get through that March, and as your grilling season starts to kind of improve, the futures market starts to dip. But that's also why seasonally we have a stronger basis level through your March, April, May, June timeframe. One thing to note, The April, June, if you watch that spread together, it was about $2 a week ago. Now it's $4. You're starting to see that cash market at least be sustained or stronger versus a weaker futures board. A lot of positive things from a fundamental market. Really, the only negative, right? The major negative right now for me is the economic fears. There's a lot of guys, you look at the fund position, it's very low in comparison to the rest of the marketplace. Funds manage money, the speculator, they want to own commodities, and live cattle in general have not been a popular target because of those demand fears. But on that, our cumulative demand for the year is at a record pace, and a lot of it is going out of the country. China 5 years ago was a non-event as far as U.S. demand, and now they are a pretty big buyer of our product. I saw earlier in the week, and there's still really not any details, but China actually banned 2 different Brazilian poultry and meat packing plants. It's only a week ban, but again, little things like that, they add up in a hurry in a market that is very volatile and kind of hanging on a cliff as far as where the demand picture goes.
So I'm wondering, you talked about this basis, and what does a stronger basis mean right now for cattle producers, Ethan?
On the feed side, obviously, it's going to be a net negative. Not many of your cattle feeders really have a lot of forward thought as far as feed. They want to figure out how to produce the best gains. How do I manage the cattle in my feedlot? Securing long-lasting and longer-term prices as far as feed are not usually in the high demand. So stronger basis today probably is going to push some of those heavier cattle out, keep the feedlots current, which is great. That's a good asset to keep feedlots current in a market like this. We are on the tipping point of basis shifting from a +1 to a +5 and stronger. If you look at that seasonality of a positive basis on live cattle, it's typically 4 to 5 over the board. Right now, it's only $1. So again, stronger basis might be a little painful as far as feed rations, but it should keep the feed yards current, which is long-term positive. Our slaughter on the back of that, slaughter this week is projected to be 676,000 head. That is a very large number week on week and year on year. Understanding some of that might be your cow kill, which is at a record pace. I know that that's drastically higher than it has been in the past, but hopefully that starts to slow down as your pastures start to green up also.
All right, we're going to come back and talk hopefully a little bit more about that as we continue with the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup. John, do you have any thoughts on basis that we're seeing as we get closer to planting, and a lot of guys watching what's happening with the new crop?
Well, we've actually, me and Ethan and another guy with Tredas, we actually have a little internal bet on basis strength or weakness going forward. And I'm of the opinion that as the farmers go to the field, we will see a strengthening basis, but it will be, I feel like it will be one of those deals where it's just simply going to be because there's no farmers delivering, right? Our planting pace here in the Southeast we're a little behind schedule. And I think, there's some potential for that, at least east of the Mississippi. Now, west of the Mississippi, I know they're drier. They'll probably get started as soon as it's warmer, but point being is basis probably will get firmer in that last half April through May timeframe. But then after that, though, we all kind of feel like there's still quite a bit of corn left out there to move. I mean, I know 650 and 750 that got a lot of corn moving on this old crop, but there's still some in the bins, and with the lack of performance of the railroads being able to get the corn moved out in a timely manner, it has been putting pressure to the downside of basis in that February, March, April timeframe, or early April. But now from this point forward, as we go to the field, I feel like there should be some basis strength.
I got to say, it looks a little cold there in northern Alabama. You wearing a long sleeve shirt and a jacket?
Well, 2 days ago it was 80, and then it was about 65, and now today we have a cold snap. We got a chance for a frost or a freeze, so we are concerned about our wheat. There are a few guys that started on corn, planting corn about 2 weeks ago. That is starting to come up, by now. The soil was warm enough, but we're supposed to actually freeze overnight tonight and tomorrow. It's 40 degrees right now, so I'm not liking it. We are behind. I need it to warm up, and then I'll be good.
Well, I know Ethan and I would like to see some warmer temperatures as well here in Nebraska, and we would like to see some rain as well this way. And Ethan, that kind of leads into the question I wanted to ask you about these livestock, because here at the Nebraska State FFA Convention, I did have a FFAer come up, a 16-year-old kid who's really worried about feedstuffs. He's worried about feed costs for the cattle, and he's worried about a lot of cows having to go to market because there just isn't the feed to feed them. And you did talk about some numbers increasing for cow slaughter. What are you hearing out in the country, though, as we move towards what should be putting cows out on spring pasture?
Right. And like I said earlier, hopefully the negative context on the cow kill right now, it does start to slow down. I did read earlier this week, we're actually at the fastest or highest cow kill numbers since 1986, which I think they started recording that in 84. So realistically, the highest in history or close to it. Again, hopefully a more favorable weather starts to help that, but your high feed costs and your dry weather is definitely going to have a major impact. And if we don't see any sort of reprieve, unfortunately, the larger guys are the ones that are going to be able to stomach it, and the little guys are going to feel it the most.
What are you looking at for the markets going into this next week?
In the short term, again, I hope for a more seasonal, positive, stronger basis. Long term, it's very easy to get. I use extremely cautiously, but it's very easy to get extremely bullish looking at high feed costs, high cow kill. If you go back to the last time we had current feed prices similar, which would have been 2012 after the drought, it took about 18 months for the cattle market really to gain some steam. And we're right on that threshold of that 18-month time frame, and you're starting to see cattle prices rally.
All right, John, in a 15-second picture, what are you going to be watching for early next week?
Early next week, just going to be looking for opportunities to put some floors underneath some corn, and possibly on soybeans with them getting back up towards the contract high again, and just moving along with our seasonal pace of protecting prices.
All right. Well, thank you, Ethan and John, for joining us this week. That's been the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup. Just a reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. The Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff right here on the Rural Radio Network.